Good day, everyone. Today, I would like to take you back to 1968. I was 14 years old at the time, and I lived in an area called Soweto, Southern Western Township. This is in Soweto, Johannesburg, in South Africa. We lived in an area called Pumulong in Orlando West. On this day, I was standing on the veranda waiting. I had been waiting for a while. And in my mind, I was thinking, oh, she's late again. I reached out, pulled a bundle of grapes that was hanging on a little vineyard that formulated part of our pathway towards the gate. And as I was eating these grapes, my eye caught this light blue VW 1200 slowly coming up and then grinding into a halt in front of our gate. A white man was driving, and then he got out, and I was surprised because this area is predominantly black and is seen as violent. The only white people who come into the area are the security forces, special branch driving Studebakers or these Ford cars with long aerials, on top. He got out of the car. He looked lean, wearing a safari suit that seemed tight on his body. And in his mouth was dangling a tobacco pipe, unlit, and then around his neck was dangling a stethoscope. He greeted me and reached backwards and pulled the driver's seat to the front, and out popped out my sister. When she saw how surprised I looked, she quickly explained that this is Dr. Kenneth Rankin. He works at Baragwanath Hospital, and this Baragwanath Hospital is the biggest hospital even today in Southern Hemisphere. It is now called Chris Hani Hospital. We followed Joyce into the house where she introduced this doctor to my mother. Ken quickly mellowed my mother's heart. Before I knew it, by the time my mother was serving him tea with scones, they seemed like they had known each other for some years. What followed thereafter was more enlightenment to me, because I started going into the city with Joyce, suburban areas around the city, and where then I met white people who seemed liberal, and other journalists too, who were from different newspapers in the country. And yeah, that was like opening us up, because all we knew as children was what we saw in locations where we were growing up. At this time, Joyce's articles were highlighting the plight of Black people in the township, their working environments, lack of facilities, etc. And then she had also a passion of visiting homes of leaders who were then serving sentences in Robben Island, like Robert Sobukwe, Sisulu, Nelson Mandela. That is how I got exposed to people like Winnie, her daughters Zinzi and Zeni, the Sobukwe family, etc. That also was enlightening because you could hear stories of the lifestyles those families were living, which were very different from ours, and the plight they were in with their husbands, fathers of the children having been sent to Robben Island. This passion Joyce had and of organizing, needs for these families and their children, because she was more flexible. She had exposure to cars, mobility, being able to go anywhere she wanted. Uh, that could be some of the reasons that then brought problems that we soon encountered. And this was on the 12th of May, 1969, when they came for her. It was a very violent situation because then all we saw was our front door was broken into. Before we knew it, there were all these white men in the house, in virtually every room, calling Joyce a terrorist. They were quite harsh even to my mother and us siblings. They ransacked the house, turning every corner of it, wanting to know where the guns were, where the subversive materials she had was. And took ages, it seemed like hours. By the time they left with her. Can you imagine the trauma that my family was subjected to? Being woken up at an ungodly hour, Joyce being taken, herself being driven, not knowing where she's being taken to. And she had a 3-year-old son, Kosinati. She had to leave. And the guilt she must have felt, being labeled terrorist, us as a family, even herself, had to come to grasp with that sort of terminology. Her passion, pen and paper of writing, was suddenly cut, from her. My mother's dressmaking, it wasn't a business, it was more a charity, mending people's clothes. That got grinded into a halt. My brother, who was then about to finish matric, had to stop school and become a breadwinner for our family. It took my mother not less than 2 months to find out where Joyce was being kept. And even when she got to know this, by the way, she even managed to get permission of visiting her at least once a month. That was the only time she could visit. And even when she went, she'd come back, you'd see she is upset, and she would not divulge what she had seen or heard wherever she's been. But we knew she had been to go and see Joyce. Later, we got to know the conditions they were kept under, that they were in solitary confinement. This is when you're kept in a small cell, a bucket at the corner where you could relieve yourself. And on the ceiling, there'd be a light, a bright light that emits heat, that is on constantly 24 hours a day. And there was no sleep. You'd try and sleep in this bright light. You'd hear screams, you'd hear shouts, as if interrogators are beating up somebody, clanking of chairs, of chains, doors being violently slammed. You simply could not sleep. you, the fear of being taken from your cell, not knowing whether you'll be returning or not, because you knew that there were people who were taken away and were never heard of after. Now that fear, we had heard of cases. I think by then it was not less than 4 cases of people either sleeping on a soap in the shower or under interrogation, dying. But then the allegations would be, like in the case of Steve Biko, the public was told that he fisted himself. Can you imagine fisting yourself to death? Those were the conditions they were living under in those cells. Now, if you are a woman and you approached your menstrual cycle, it becomes public, and in front of your interrogators, who would be an African male, who will deprive you also your sanitary needs for as long as you want, because in his mind he'd be thinking that, well, the smell of blood will make you loathe yourself. That is the sort of situation that they were inside of those cells. And then there was a case of a man called Ramosi, who had been kept in a jail in Botswana for something like 2 years. That man was brought back into South Africa to be with these people who were locked up in solitary confinement. And then those people who were in solitary, it were 21 of them. 7 of them were women. Winnie Mandela was amongst them. And with the torture that was going on, there was one particular interrogator called Swanepoel, who got to be well known because he would not relent in interrogating you until he saw signs of paranoia, depression setting in. Then he knew he'd done his job. Now Ramosi was brought in there, having already served like 2 years in Botswana and not being charged. And then he was going to be charged with these other 21 people. And when they did get charged, it was around the 16th February 1970. And then that case got dismissed immediately. And whilst the families were jubilant, trying to celebrate outside, they were re-detained again. And then it were months later that again they had to appear in court. And again, they were dismissed, those charges. But then this Ramosi was sentenced to 15 years for whatever he had done, which were like claimed to be sabotage activities. And he was sent to Robben Island. And he served that 15 years. And soon as he was taken out, he committed suicide. That is how much traumatized he was. I mean, he didn't see the point of living anymore. That were the conditions Joyce and them were subjected to in South Africa. So that is a story I wanted to share today. And if you like hearing this sort of information, please do subscribe, share, and then you can also reach out on my footprints for change at gmail.com. You could address that to Teddy. Thank you. Until next time again. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.